Good afternoon and welcome back to Dynamics 365 Finance and Operation. We're actually going through the configuration of human resource module. Previous video talked about the positions and now we're simply going to move over to some of the tabs on top just to discuss a little bit more about some of the processes and tasks you can execute using those tabs on the top. We won't be discussing on the commerce and time registration, so we're going to skip that because it's more or less irrelevant. A lot of integration is involved in this piece. So I have decided to skip that. And the links, as you could tell, they are basically everything that you would see on the top. So that's why there's no need for us to go through every single one of these because we will be going through every single one of these while we talk about the tabs on the top. So you could see underneath the leave, for instance, if there was a leave here, so view time off, suspend leave, so all of that is available here and a little bit more of it. So we'll focus on these ones and not touch on the links because they're the same. So going back to the profile itself of this employee, right underneath the work tab, we have four different options. One being change position, terminate, change worker employment type, and worker action history. So I'll talk a little bit about these personnel actions. So if you want to change the position of an employee, for instance, from if it has been promoted to another position, this is how you would do it. So you go into the record and you click on change position. A new form opens up. And in this case, a personal action number is assigned to it automatically. So we've talked about the number sequence piece. That's the configuration that you will need to do in order for these actions to have each unique ID for a audit trail purposes. So, do look at that number sequence configuration video if you don't know what that means. The personnel action types. So this is two different action types that are configured in the system. They're either transfer request or request for transfer. They're both the same with or without the workflow. And you absolutely need a workflow. So the one that says in description without the workflow, that simply means that there is a workflow signed to it in the personnel action, but that workflow is as simple as start and all the way to the end. There's no condition in between, no manual task involved in it. So it's just for us to skip the route of workflow because it's absolutely necessary for a change position or transfer to occur with a workflow. So that's just a standard functionality that you need to do. So if you want to avoid it, if there's no process associated with a workflow that requires an approval when you're changing a position, then just simply create a workflow that start to end without any conditions and link that up with the personal action. And if you need a workflow, of course, then you configure a workflow and assign it to that personal action. And you can see 174 workflow is the version number of it. So you would need to select one of them from a task perspective. And then you would need to, of course, to continue with putting in other information, for instance, the new assignment. So when does the new assignment start? We can make it future dated, we can make it backdated, we can make it effective as of today. And this field will automatically get populated. So it really depends on when the new assignment starts. A day before that, the current assignment would end. And you would have to select a new assignment end date. So normally you could do it never. If it's a contract position, then just enter a assignment end date for that position. The position itself, so you need to select an open position. So these are all the open positions that this employee can occupy. So as a reminder, if an employee already occupies a position, this form wouldn't have that position until it becomes available. So these positions are actually open, so you can select any one of them. And once you select that, a job on its own gets auto-populated because a job is linked to a position. So we'll talk about that hierarchy and how it plays a role with the compensation, of course. And once you have that selected, so you can make this as a primary position, which you should because you can only have one primary position per employee. The full-time equivalent, normally this plays a role with if this employee has multiple positions, and full-time equivalent plays also a role in the reporting and the budget. So we won't touch base on that just yet, but that is where the FTE comes in. So you'll get to see a lot of Power BI graphs of FTE in the management workspace. Transfer for reason. So in this case, he was promoted to this particular position, 322, but you can also assign a different transfer reason. So we have quite a few that we configured. And if you don't know how to configure the reason codes, to go to that video. I have actually configured and showed you how you can configure them. Very easy to do. And then you can assign the new compensation. So if the compensation has been set up correctly, then we can assign a new compensation to this employee. So let's give it a try to see if this has been configured correctly. And so you could see all of these are becoming available to me. We can do a lateral move. So the worker employment is USMF. We can probably say actually promotion has no relevance. Actually, this action has no relevance on the plan that you get to select. So step level 2, that's good. Let's see. Oh, so unfortunately there's nothing here on the plan. So that's where the proper configuration comes in handy. So we'll talk a little bit about that, how that works. But unfortunately for this particular position, a setup is not done correctly by the system, and I haven't set it up myself. So that's why you don't get to see a plan. But in this case, for instance, for this particular position, you could see the levels there, the plan and step is there, and the pay rate is also there. We would have seen something very similar to what we see for here, and then we would have seen a pay rate, and you simply just click continue. So let me do that actually. So let me get rid of this, so we don't have to assign any compensation, so we can continue. So that's it. Oh, and another thing that you would want to make sure that you know is you cannot assign a, a new compensation when an employee is changing the organization. So that doesn't work, unfortunately. And then that could be the case here, where I see that GLSI is the worker's new employment for this position. So this employee is migrating from USMF to GLSI, and you cannot assign a new compensation here on this form. So you would have to go into the GLSI and assign that there. So that's one key thing that you should know. Whereas for the position that is within USMF, you can easily assign a compensation plan. So a lateral move within the organization is good, but if you're going outside of the organization to a different legal entity, you cannot assign a new compensation. Something to note for sure. So if you click continue, now a new form shows up, and here, if we were doing a USMF position to another USMF position that's open, we can assign a compensation here as well. Same thing as what we just showed there. We won't talk about transition checklist. That's something to look into at some point later. Basically a checklist for everyone to do. It would be assigned accordingly to workers. This gives you a detail about the worker position assignment, exact copy of what we just saw and edit. And all you have to do is press complete. So right now, the only reason it's complete because the workflow has been disabled. Whereas if there was a workflow, then you would have had a submit button, and you would simply submit this and a workflow would be triggered. And obviously somebody would need to approve it for this action to be completed. So that is how you transfer in an employee, and from there you can continue adding the information of that employee moving forward. With that, I will leave you to just explore this piece of the functionality, and we'll go to the next piece in the next video.